Um, welcome, no matter who you are, where you are on life's journey, you are welcome here.
Give an introduction. All right. Yeah, and I might have to jump onto the other line when Aviv finally wakes up. We're hoping she sleeps it off, whatever it was. But yeah, happy Mother's Day. I feel like I've maybe said different versions of this at different times, and it kind of puts me on the spot. But yeah, I joined the society because I just love the idea that there is this focus here on ethics and on doing good in the world that is outside of any specific or any really religion, and just sort of recognizing that, you know, humans are, it sort of really speaks to my even intuitive appreciation of the world and of people, and that you know, everyone deserves to have opportunities and be treated fairly and equally, and that there's, you know, some work to be done to help kind of continue to build a good society and a welcoming society. And I think, as I said on one of the first meetings where I joined, I mean, I love just, you know, just connecting with people here who have that kind of spirit, but also to be part of a community that does good and sort of amplifies my relatively weak, you know, individual voice. Like, I feel like there's only so much you can kind of do on your own, but to be part of a group that really encourages and puts some organization. Patty's obviously done a wonderful job leading that, you know, to just try to get us organized to actually take our voices and our desires and do something good with it. Like that really spoke to me very early on. So yeah, I guess it's been almost a year or something, or more than a year that we've been part of this. So
yeah, we're so happy that you and Jesse have found our community, and I share a lot of what you said.
And I'll just add that Randi and I, Randy's a dear friend of mine, and we kind of go back, and he has changed my awareness and tends to change people wherever he goes. So it's such an honor to have him here today, and yeah, so excited.
Yeah, good. Thank you, Jesse. And in just a short while, we will be turning things over to Randi for his program with us this morning. Yes, today is a day that we recognize mothers. And of course, in June, we set aside a day to recognize and honor our fathers. And I was just giving some thought to these two holidays that are celebrated, and was thinking more in the lines of the idea of mothering and fathering, and knowing that, you know, there are many inclusive ways to think of mothers and fathers. And so I was searching the internet thinking, okay, there must be something that someone has written that, you know, maybe expresses a little bit what, you know, I had in my head, but didn't know how to put in words. And yes, indeed, I did find something. I'm always quite successful at finding things just when I seem to need them. They just sort of show up before me somewhere on the internet. But this is something I found in the LGBTQ Nation site. And it was written by a gay father of two, and also an LGBTQ activist. His name was Rob Watson. And he writes this about these two holidays, one in May, one in June. And it has to do with this idea of mothering and fathering. It begins, you personify a love that overcomes all obstacles biases, and inequities. We enter the season that honors the two aspects of your parenting and the love that you bestow to the world. That love becomes realized when you give yourself to your children. You are mothering in the traditionally understood sense when you nourish, nurture, and shower affection. You sow the seeds of confidence, vision, and creativity. You are fathering in the traditionally understood sense when you protect, guide with principle, instill values, and inspire. You sow the seeds of morality, leadership, and personal power. In the real sense, you are mother and father, integrated into a seamless parenting whole. During 2 days in the current months, we honor you, not as the perfect parent, since that entity is truly a myth, but as one who still wants to attain the status, no matter how unrealistic it is. We honor you for the days when doing your best with all good intentions has to be the way it is. You are magnificent. You are doing the most important work for which humanity can ask. You hold in your hands our future, and you deserve nothing less than dignity and respect at your back. To quote the song, you are wind beneath the wings of life, and we thank you. Happy Mother's Day. Happy Father's Day coming in June. Happy You Day. Few announcements this morning. Monday evening at 7 o'clock, we do have an ethical action team meeting. And if you would like to attend, contact me and I will, or contact our email info at susquehanna-valley-ethicalsociety.com to get the Zoom information. On Saturday, May 15th, the Ethical Action Committee is holding an emergency food drive for Haven Homeless Shelter. And that will be from 10 a.m. to noon at the East Buffalo Township Building, which is on Fairground Road. Nancy, you did write up the article for this food drive. Do you recall some of the things that Haven Ministry is looking for?
They seem to be, I mean, I'm gonna have to do this from memory. I don't have it in front of me now, but they seem to be emphasizing things that were definitely more concentrated in nutrition. You know, things like tuna and peanut butter and boxed pasta, sauces, you know, boxed macaroni and cheese type things. Those sorts of items they were in need of.
Okay, great. Thank you, Nancy. And of course, Haven Ministries is in, you know, some financial hardship right now. One, of course, their service has greatly been extended because of the pandemic, and they are, you know, servicing a large, much larger number of families who are suffering through this, and they're short on funds. So not only are we holding this food drive, but our society is donating $500 to Haven Ministries in order, you know, to help their, you know, the work that they do. Right. Right. And then next Sunday, Sunday, May 16th, Gregory Snyder, who is actually here with us this morning, is going to be doing a program. Now, Gregory, I know I gave it a title, Being in Community, not certain, you know, what angle you are going to be taking next Sunday, but I will have more information on that when I receive that here later this afternoon. So Gregory, we're looking forward to your visit with us next next Sunday. And of course, we are a 501c3 nonprofit, and it is our membership and donations that keep us up and running. So you will find anywhere on our website a button where you can donate and help us continue the work that we do here in our region. We call ourselves an intentional community. And what does that mean? What do we do when we come together each Sunday or many other times during, a month with projects and events that we hold? So we meet to deepen our sense of the meaningfulness of life. We meet to shine light on the ideas with which we guide our choices. We come together to give us courage and take the higher path, and to get to know one another over time, an appreciation of each one's unique and incomparable worth. And of course, we work for a world where love and justice cross all borders. And now, if you would like to join us, you may unmute yourself or keep yourself muted, and we will read what we read each Sunday together, our affirmation. So please join us. We affirm the worth, dignity, and uniqueness of every human being. Good. You know what? We get better each Sunday and how we're in unison, and it's not easy to do on a Zoom platform. Okay, so we do have our special guest this morning, Randi Reinhold, and this is where I'm going to turn it over to Jessie. She did give a nice introduction earlier, but I'm certain she has more to share about Randi, and we'll get us started here this morning. So Randi, are you going to need screen share?
Yes, please.
Okay, then I'm going to make you, okay, first of all, I have to stop my screen share. Okay, I'm going to make you co-host.
Fantastic.
Yes. Normally I do that right at the beginning, but I forgot this morning. Okay.
It's always nice to see that when others host Zoom meetings, they also narrate their actions on screen. I do that as well.
Sorry, I do that.
And
yes,
you will all experience that a little bit this morning.
Okay, Jessie.
So I had Randi's bio in front of me, and I'm having trouble accessing it right now. So I'll just say a bit off the top of my head, and Randi,
Don't worry, Jessie, I'm going to introduce myself as well. So
okay. So
that's all we'll do today. We'll just introduce me, and everyone will take a turn. Just kidding. Go ahead, Jessie.
Well, Randi is an educator of young children up to adults, and right now is working in many forms as a equity and justice, diversity and inclusion. There's so many titles for it right now, but in many capacities to do equity work, and has given talks and does a lot of professional development with educators, has worked for the Trevor Project in crisis response for the LGBTQ community. And I'll let you say, the accurate details. And I know you have a lot to share with us, so I want to turn it over to you, Randi.
Thank you so much for that introduction. And I think that was a great lead in. I'll share my screen in just a moment. It's always hard to move out of the space where we can all see each other, especially now because we're not in a room together. So as much as we can, I like to keep that full view of everyone's faces. But I think that one thing that you just mentioned, Jessie, and this is kind of unplanned, is that what'll connect to the work we do this morning is that idea of language being so evolutionary, and that we acknowledge, right, that whatever the term, the new term that comes up, that we just acknowledge it, right? And it doesn't always necessarily have to replace another word. It can be in addition to another word, but that we pay attention to words and labels and not labels. And we just ask people, right, to tell us what it means to them. And we'll talk about that a little bit as we work together. And I thought it was great how Justy was sharing some of the words and language that he uses, and I'm going to practice using your words.
Oh, Randy,
I
you are the
haven't
first
seen those.
person. I don't want to interrupt, but you are the first person who has ever called me Bob. And so, mwah, thank you, man.
Thank you. And so I just think that's great. And any chance you can try something and learn and just hear from the person, that's always the default for me. So with that said, I will tell you a little bit more, and I won't spend too much time on me because I'd like us to all share some space and think through what it's like to support young people together. So we're going to go into present mode. See, I'm narrating myself already. And there we go. Can you see that? Oh, interesting. It's still showing our other tabs, but that's all right. Let's try one more time just for good measure here. All right, making sure I've got my sound capable there. There we go. All right. Do you all see my notes or do you all see the presentation? Because that would be a very different experience for you.
I think they're your notes.
Oh,
If they say 1, 2, and 3, slide 1, 23. Yeah.
all right. So we're going to do regular presentation. We'll try that. So funny. You can practice this as many times as you want and then still a little bit different. There we go. All right. Back to the Zoom screen. Here. Third time's a charm. I think we're at the third time. There we go. How's that?
Yay. That's it.
All right, this is going to be a test of my abilities right now because it's not letting me see my notes. So I'm revealing that to you all right now, but that should be fine. So first of all, welcome, thank you. If you would like to put your name and your pronouns that you prefer or use, and how you are connected with young people, and it's okay if your answer is, I'm not connected with young people, but I still want to learn, right? And you can put that in the chat. Anytime you see this yellow chat box, that'll be an invitation to respond to whatever the prompt or question is right below. And so Jesse, if you can be helping me moderate that, that is always fantastic. I am someone who experiences ADD, and so it is really not possible. I think it's not possible really for anyone to both give output information and also take in constantly at the same time. So just be patient if you are sending things into the chat for me to have a look-see at that. But just please welcome and share yourself with us. And maybe like a little bit about why you're here, right, is why I'm asking that question about how you're connected to young people or not. And that the chat is for all of us, right? So if you are paying attention to that, you're learning about each other as well in the process. So I'm going to peek just to see what some of these connections are. Okay, so I'm seeing some family. We have some educators. Justy did let me know that there were some educators in the group, which is exciting to hear. Different ages. Amazing. Great. And also, yes, happy Mother's Day to everyone. I felt I wanted to say that as well. I told my mom she'd be getting a virtual card this year, and she was like, "Don't, every day can be a day, you know, to celebrate." So there's that too. I was like, okay, thanks, Mom. I feel less pressure now. So as I mentioned, I would introduce myself. I won't stay here long, but just to kind of give you a sense of what has brought me to, and please keep sharing, if you haven't put that in the chat, keep sharing out. But what has brought me to this work, so as a kid growing up in New York City, you think, oh, it's such a diverse place, and everybody must be just so easily welcomed and included, right? And things get better and better no matter where we are, but things are different in different places, and over time things change. And so my childhood, and hopefully you'll get snippets of what it was like for me throughout this presentation, because I find that sharing stories from my own experience really do help. And I tend to not do it as much. So I'm excited in this presentation to share a little bit more about my experience if it's of use to folks to hear firsthand. But it was, I had a family that was very supportive, but being in New York, being such a diverse place of lots of people, I still experienced a lot of things that made it hard for me to feel comfortable in my own skin. And so it really was a journey that it was so important to have people and resources around me, what we'll refer to later in this presentation as a support network. And really that the people around me, the people closest to me, are the ones who have made my life the positive experience, or at least got me going in a positive direction. And so I'm just going to really emphasize that, how important that piece is to anyone. So all these other parts of me, right? And this list could honestly be twice as long, maybe 3 times, if I was going to share even more about myself. But I moved out to Colorado, never thought that would ever happen. Moved out to Colorado about 3 years ago. I thought I was going to be a lifelong New York City person. And that in itself has really kind of changed, right? Just like getting to know someone who's different than you, getting to know a place that's very different has changed me as well. And so I've come out and started working in independent schools here, which is similar to what I was doing back in New York. As Jesse mentioned, we worked together at the Little Red Schoolhouse in New York City, which is a school in the West Village that was actually started by an out lesbian in the 1920s named Elizabeth Irwin. She was ahead of her time, I would say, in lots of ways, including being openly gay and living with her female partner. And started a school that was very much aligned with the practices of John Dewey. So this idea that children can learn through experience rather than this idea that we just kind of open their heads and dump information in. And at the time that was fairly radical, but eventually went on to become kind of the baseline for public schools in New York. And so we see a lot more of those practices across our schools in the country more and more now, where we're using an approach that's really just coming from the interests of children, or kind of coming through the work of children in their play and in their understanding of the world. And so I say that piece in particular on here. I won't talk about everything because that's something that I think is so important when we think about children and identity in general, is that if we're really playing to their interests and the things that are important to them, that's going to be the best way for them to learn, grow, and just become the best version of themselves that they can be. And that's something that I wanted to be a part of for young people, based on the experiences that I had. If you'd like to ask me anything else about myself later at another time that's on this list, I'd love to chat more about those things. But I'm so glad to be here. So let's move on away from me a little bit here and look at what we're going to be doing. So we'll talk a little bit. You had your norms that Patty brought up in the beginning, and I appreciate that. We'll look at what I call brave space guidelines in just a moment to think about how we can engage in a space together that is open and welcoming to different people's thoughts and experiences. Then we'll go over some terminology. We'll look at what it's like for people in this country, anyways, to be LGBTQ plus. And again, that really depends on where, right? So we can't assume everyone's experience is exactly the same. We will then think more together about support networks and what that looks like. We'll talk about the outcomes of having a strong or not a strong support network. And then we'll look at some ways to take action together. And finally, at the end, anything that's in this presentation will be in the end on a list for you to see and have, and I'm happy to share the slide deck with you all as well later. So with that, we'll go into our Brave Space guidelines. And in the beginning, I talked about language, how Jesse mentioned, you know, equity and inclusion and all the words that we use when we think about social justice work and equity. And this slide in itself could have many titles. You might have heard a safe space. You might have heard community norms. You might have heard, community agreement, right? When we think about being in a classroom with students, sometimes we might call it that. And so really, does it matter what we call it? Well, yes and no. When I was with Trevor Project, the conversation that I engaged in during my training was that difference between a safe space and a brave space, and really hit home for me to recognize that when we name something as a safe space, we are saying that everyone is completely safe. And I don't know about you, but I can't ensure the safety of everyone in this space on an emotional and intellectual level. And so to say that it's a safe space is kind of this dream, right? We would love that, but not everyone might feel safe all the time sharing or hearing some of the things that other people may have to say, that they may say that was not intended to be harmful, but may have landed that way. And so when we look at these, we just ask you to be brave and to take care of yourself. So if that might mean that if someone says something, you know, you might need to say, hey, I have a different opinion, right? Or you might say, that landed wrong for me. Can you tell me more? It might mean you're not ready to actually address it. Maybe brave for you means, you know, instead of screaming or shouting at that person, you're going to go ahead and turn your camera off, mute yourself, you know, scream into a pillow and come back, right? And maybe later you'll be ready to engage and explain, you know, what your experience was. But being brave just means take care of yourself, but also try to communicate what you need to others, because they're not going to be able to read your mind otherwise. And so are there any guidelines here that people would like us to spend time on in particular because you're not sure what it means, or you know, any questions? Because I know there's a prompt there that asks you, which do you intend to practice intentionally today? And that's not to say we shouldn't try to intentionally practice all of them, but maybe there's one, right, in particular. It's nice to keep your goals like this sometimes, that you really just want to get better at, or is really important to you in this moment. So that's twofold. Let us know if there's a term or one of these that doesn't make sense to you or you want to hear more about, or what your intentions are. And I'll get quiet for a minute there so we can see that chat. And Jesse, will you monitor those? Because I actually see I can't access the chat at all. So just let me know.
Do you want me to read them aloud or anything, or just?
I think that would be great. Yeah, so we can just hear. And you don't have to name folks, but.
So let me, I don't know why I can't scroll.
Especially if there's a question, really, too.
Yes, okay. Aiming to listen and process. I do like brave space. Listen, 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 and process. I am pansexual and have firstly been an LGBT youth, but have also previously worked with LGBTQIA youth in an educator mentor capacity in both Maine and New York. I'm interested in gathering the newest resources for LGBTQIA allyship and mentorship so that I can help create something like that here in Pennsylvania. A lot of listening, owning impact, listen, process, and learn what Randi calls different things. And could you explain what lean into discomfort entails?
Yeah, sure. I can give a little bit about it. So that lean into discomfort, at least for me, in my experience and what I've learned through my work, is you know, people will refer to equity work as being hard, right, or being difficult. And it is. When we talk about topics like race or gender or sexual orientation, and people come from so many different backgrounds, religions, belief systems, values, it can feel hard. And so that leaning into discomfort just means, despite that, you know, recognizing that we're all human, and that if we're coming with an open mind and we're coming with an open heart, um, we need to move past, right? You know, think about today, you keep hearing the word polarization, right? We're not going to be able to heal that polarization if we all just decide that when it gets hard, we just step back or walk away. So leaning into discomfort just means pushing through that uncomfortable feeling, because as, you know, as we all think about learning, anything you have to learn that's new, um, you're not going to make that progress unless you push through what's hard. So if you think about it in terms of like a math problem, or um, you know, learning a new language, you know, you're not going to be successful unless you work at it. So that's how I see lean into discomfort. That was a long-winded answer, but I hope that makes sense. And I think it partners with other ones, right? So if you're leaning into that discomfort in a conversation with someone who has a different opinion or perspective than you, um, and they say something that impacts you in a negative way or makes you feel any certain way, it's your responsibility to let them know why and where you're coming from, so that you can come to a place of understanding of those differences rather than just shut down.
And I think Nancy has her hand up.
Yeah, Nancy. Let's see, are you hitting unmute?
I had
There
to
you go.
unmute myself. I'm sorry. No, I was scrambling around there. I was directing my message in the wrong way, and I finally got to you, Randy. But I wondered about the term crisp. Do you mean keep it brief by crisp? Don't just ramble on and on and on?
That's part of it. Yeah, exactly. I don't think I need to say too much more. That's a big part of it, and I really have to work at that one sometimes. You know, I'm the kind of person who it's really important to me that people understand what I'm saying, and so my tendency is to explain it 5 different ways, and sometimes I just need to try one way, breathe, see how it gets responded to, and then, right, if they ask for more, they can.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, thank you. I also like to just fill awkward airspace. I think it's part of why I'm in this work. So those are the brave space guidelines that I have in mind. If there are other things that you'd like to have the group add to this list today, please feel free to put that in the chat as well, or just like Nancy did, and thank you, I meant to actually say earlier, just unmute yourself, because that's way easier for me to engage and understand without looking at the chat. So I love that some terminology just came up in the chat. It came up earlier, right? So this video, it's pretty brief, but it's going to show what all these letters, right? Because the acronym has grown and grown and grown over time to describe what we now call LGBTQ plus most frequently. And as you see in the image, even here, the word queer inside this umbrella. And, you know, some folks may not actually identify as queer, but it's come to kind of be an umbrella term for the acronym. And I don't know they get into that in the video. So if we want to talk more about that, we certainly can as well after, because afterwards I'll ask you to share maybe what terms are new to you or you'd like to know more about. And I'll say right here, because we're still very early on in my presentation, my goal is not to like get through the content like as though it's like a curriculum. My goal is to be where we need us to be. And so if we don't quite get to everything, I hope that you trust that I'll move us through the conversation in ways that are responsive to what the group is doing and needing. So here's where we hope that the sound is going to work out. So as I play, if Patty, you're on my screen, if you would give a thumbs up if you can hear the sound. No, okay. see. Probably means that my sound settings need to be a little different.
We heard it.
We
Randy.
heard it, but
Oh, you all did. Put your thumb up if you heard it, because I now have everyone on my screen. Oh, interesting. Patty, you're the host. I guess you're blocked. You don't get all the things. Hopefully, it's visual too. So that's what I'm going to reassure you. So hopefully it'll be all right. All right, let's look back at that. Nancy, do you see that? Thumbs up if you do. All right. Here comes our video. All right. It was closed captioned. That was wonderful. It's funny how I didn't notice that when I put the slides together. Look how inclusive. So the question in the bottom is which terms are either new to you or ones you want to gain more understanding about?
So I'm learning more about the two-spirited term.
And if anyone's in the chat, Jesse, will you let me know?
Not yet.
Okay, great. So it may be that this group is very well steeped in the language, which means we don't have to spend too much time looking at that, but just to reiterate that idea that not, you know, if one person may identify as queer because they're LGBTQIA2, right, S, and someone else might not. And when we think about that evolution of language, the word queer at a certain time was really used in a harmful way towards people who identified in these different ways. And so it can be difficult for people in a certain generation to accept that word as a positive thing, whereas other folks might feel really empowered in reclaiming that word in a positive light because of the ways that it was used to create harm against people of LGBTQ status. So just being aware and saying to someone, how do you identify is just such an important question. There's a resource that I don't include in this slide deck, but that I'll make mention of for young people. Actually, right now I'm thinking, why isn't this in here? But there's someone named Linz Amer, and I can put it in the chat. This person has created a YouTube channel, a website, curriculum, and probably more for young people and their families to learn about LGBTQ identity. And the YouTube channel is called Queer Kid Stuff. Again, I'm gonna see if I can get to our chat. I cannot. So Jesse, if you can put Queer Kid Stuff into the chat, that would be wonderful. Even with just a Google search, you should be able to find the work there. And the videos are super short, but really fun, entertaining, and ways to learn about all things related and beyond. Honestly, there's stuff that they do with other forms of identity and diversity and equity work as well. So I'll just circle back and ask, are there any other questions about language in the chat before we move on?
Agender, interesting concept. Other terms, gender fluid and gender gifted.
Yes, thank you. Yeah, and we'll look at even some other terms such as gender variant, and sometimes even for me, especially with my attentional issues, you know, when I think about language, like I always want to get it right, even myself, when it comes to this umbrella and topic, and it can be tricky, right? You know, sometimes some of the words are so closely related, like gender variant or gender creative, and I think if we get too caught up sometimes in that actually can add to our anxiety around talking about these things. So when we lean into discomfort, it's like maybe saying something like, I'm still working on understanding that. Is it the same thing as blank? Can you tell me more? What does it mean to you? Because really the most important thing is that that person that you're trying to connect with, that they feel like you're understanding where they're coming from, even if their definition is different than what you might be familiar with for that word, or someone else that you know who also identifies with that word. So hopefully that makes sense. And I learned a lot about that when I was with Trevor. Actually, I would be on the call with a young person, or not. We had people call, you know, way outside of our demographic, and the response is you don't leave anyone out, right? So there's a certain point on the call where you might remind them that our demographic is this. We're really glad that you called, but like we offer that help to anybody who calls. And I would talk to folks who, you know, had many different definitions of even the word pansexual. So just really important to honor that individual's identity and needs and experiences. So what are LGBTQ young people dealing with? So the Human Rights Campaign does this report every, I believe, 2 years. I could have that slightly off. But the most recent one, I would imagine maybe they were going to be putting one out fairly soon, in other words, but this was the more recent one that I have found to show some of the statistics around how young people feel, particularly in relation to school, but they also obviously report out on home life and relationships. And so I'm going to read them. I'll pause in between because the language in some of them, for me anyways, like takes a minute for me to process. It's like almost like double negatives. So I'll read them, and then if there are any comments or questions or thoughts, we can look at that. So in regard to like the category of friends, less than 30% of young people who identify as LGBTQ plus, who are between the ages of 13 and 17, so less than 30% of them are out as whatever they identify as to their non-LGBTQ friends. Whereas that same demographic age range of the same group, they're 50% more likely to come out to their friends who are LGBTQ plus as well. Which makes sense to me when I think about affinity, right? We feel safer sharing things about ourselves when we know that the other person either shares that experience or can better understand what that experience is like. But I'll just pause if there are any questions or thoughts on those two bullets. Dusty.
Yeah, Randy, I find this really interesting. I work with college students, but we're always hearing on the media that young people are so much more accepting of the LGBT community. But it's looking like here with the young people who actually are members of that community, they're still not feeling really safe, even with their peers who are not LGBT. I mean, more so than before, but we're really under, way under 50% here.
Yeah, yeah. And when we think about, I mentioned earlier, like the location piece. So one of the biggest pieces I learned during my work with Trevor, and that'll come up a lot just because it's related to this presentation. I spent 3 years with them volunteering twice a month. So like in the grand scheme of things, it wasn't a super duper amount of hours, but it was significant amount of time. And I learned so much. So, you know, forgive me if I talk about Trevor a lot. I'm not trying, they're not paying me to promote them. It was one of the most profound experiences of my life. And, you know, for me being in New York City, as I mentioned earlier, you know, as I got older, I really did feel like I found acceptance from most people in my life, whether they were LGBTQ identified or not. And I think that's largely just due to exposure in a bigger city to all different people. So whether or not everyone's understanding was to the degree that I maybe would have liked them to know about my identity, at least that they were open. But when I would speak to young people, I really started to understand that the larger picture of our country was very different and is very different than that assumption, right? That if you replicate my experience in New York or young people's experience in a city like New York, it's just not the case. So there are people, young people all over the country who feel extremely, extremely isolated, still feel like what they're experiencing is unique to them. They feel alienated and just not seen and even fearful for their lives in some cases.
So, Randy, is it, excuse me, I didn't mean to interrupt.
No, sure.
Is it still like the case like of boys don't cry? I mean, in some areas of this country still.
In some areas, Patty, I think it was Patty that mentioned LGBTQ Nation. As you were speaking about that publication, I pulled it up on my screen, and the first story that came up was that there was a 17-year-old Black girl who was openly gay, who was apparently recently, they're looking into it. They don't have a lot of information on the motives, but she was openly gay, and it sounds like a bunch of other young people lynched her or hung her. And so whether or not that's related to her racial identity, her LGBTQ status, we can't make assumptions, right? But we have to factor in those identities that were both seemingly public in that child's life, and what that might have had to do with the dynamics between her and her peers that did this. And so that is a real thing. Yes, would be my answer. I have to look at what I'm seeing and hearing. And so with regard to family, 24% of young people under the LGBTQ plus umbrella feel like they can definitely be themselves at home in that identity of whatever it is that they hold. So less than a quarter. And we have to also factor in that we're maybe not every single young person who is LGBTQ is in this survey, because there's going to be a certain percentage who are not even comfortable being out to anyone, not even maybe calling a safe space or anything. So that number is probably maybe a little bit lower even.
We
Less
have
than
a
10.
comment in the chat.
Oh yeah.
Chime in. Not feeling ability to come out to your friends is also total perception. When I came out to my friends at age 17, after years of keeping it secret, several of them said, "Me too," and I had no idea.
Yeah. So that isolating experience, and then coming to realize how many other people have that isolating experience. Meanwhile, we could have had that connection and been there to support each other, that support network. My goodness, I'm looking at the time, it is 8:28, and I think this is where we usually wrap up, and my goodness, we are not nearly anywhere where I thought we would be. But might I ask that we move to a couple other slides before we pause? Is that all right with the group? So this was just really to get us thinking about what young people's experiences are. Of course, there are other factors that have kind of further impacted or added on to all of the pieces that already create stress and anxiety for young people, let alone LGBTQ young people who hold identities that make it even harder. So thinking about our political climate over the past few years, regardless of what your politics are, right? There's been stress for all. And the pandemic, of course, creating even further isolation because young people aren't able to be physically in spaces with each other. And when you think about a young person who is struggling with identity, and now they're at home, and if their family is not an accepting family, they're feeling even more bogged down with that. And so this video illustrates some different experiences amongst young people, and they talk a bit about, I'm just kind of narrating it for you since we're not going to view it. Of course, when you look back and review the slides, you can go through everything in full, but just talking about their experiences as being whatever LGBTQ identity they hold. And that comes to a piece I think is really important, which is recognizing that when we hold all these different identities, right, which can be referred to as cultural identities, our experiences differ based on all those pieces, right? And so, for example, when we think about the dominant culture and norms of being cisgender or heterosexual in our society, these are the ideas that were kind of came with the program, right, so to speak, as I was growing up. This is who gets married. This is what it's like to be a man. This is what it's like to be a woman. And these messages are reinforced everywhere you look. And it's 2021 now, and we think, oh, it's better. And it is, right? We're getting more and more perspectives mirrored back at us through these different facets and different places. However, the dominant culture has not really changed all that much, right? We still see mostly these messages. But when we think about non-dominant, and I'm going to move you all's wonderful faces down so I can see that. So this is for myself, right? Like I'm seeing these messages here on the left growing up, but I'm feeling these things. So I'm attracted to my same-sex peers. Growing up, I was a girl, or I was told I was a girl. My interests were aligning more with those demonstrated by the opposite sex peers that I had with the boys. And I felt extreme dysphoria around my body and what was going on, and very confusing time. And so when we go to the intersectionality piece, and that's something that some of you may or may not have experience in thinking through or talking about, but it basically means how our identities intersect, right, to impact our experiences. And so those experiences and some of those aspects of identity, we might be considered someone who holds privilege because we're part of the dominant culture, right? If I'm cisgender, which means that my gender aligns with the sex that I was assigned at birth, right? The world is for me. Like our society is for me. It was designed that way. If I identify as transgender or gender variant or gender creative, I might be considered someone who's in a disadvantage because I'm not part of that dominant group or that dominant culture. And so when you layer that with other pieces, like you are a person of color or you have a disability, those disadvantages are twofold, threefold, right? So those layers. So when I think about my experience, for sure, did I have difficult challenges? Yes. But when I think about what life might be like for a young person in the experience we just outlined, that young woman who I think she was in Massachusetts, I could be wrong, right? Like she's got other things that she's dealing with, other forms of oppression that that have led to her death, not to be too morbid. And so on here, you'll see we can look at typical ages of what it looks like to be of gender variance experience or transgender experience. But know that not all gender variant and transgender individuals recognize that about themselves during their childhood. They might not really come to understand and have self-realization until they're an adult. We want to think a lot about who our support network is, because the more of these points on the star we have at play that are positive and affirming us, the better our experience is going to be. And that's really why this talk, right? Why I'm here to do this talk with you all today is because you are so important to combating the negative outcomes that we've been talking about this whole time. You really are. So really what it is just being supportive, and that means learning, right? Being non-judgmental and just committed to supporting young people. I won't go through this video, but we've got a young person right here who is just fantastic, literally refers to themselves as Desmond is amazing. This is a young drag queen living in the New York City area whose mother and support network is super strong. And you can check out that video, but you want to be, mostly I was looking at this one, and maybe I see the time is 8:34. I'm going to ask Patty. I know that some folks might need to go and that you generally keep it open for Q&A. I'd love to do this activity with whoever wants to stay, and then we can do Q&A. Would that be good?
That would be fine. Yes. So what I could do, Randy, I could close out our meeting with our final words to go off, you know, in the week ahead, and then we can come back.
Great.
Would
That sounds good to me.
Work?
Yes, and I would love to come back for part 2 if that feels of interest to you.
Right.
You know,
so yes, would this be a good spot to?
I think so.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. So I'm going to need my screen share.
Great.
Just a second. And oh, maybe I lost my okay. I apparently my slideshow got somewhere. So anyway, I won't need my screen share, but I can you know, certainly say at this point that thank you so much for this wonderful presentation. And I'm certain that all of us have learned, you know, a great deal. And of course, if it's brought to mind, or for me, some questions, which I'll ask when we go into the question and answer part of the program. But I want to thank everyone for being here, who found our society this morning, and know that you are welcome to come back at any point. Just keep checking Facebook or our website for our programs that are upcoming and how you can join in. And so, final words to get us all set for the upcoming week is go, create justice, create love, be the way to peace, be the truth of peace, be the light of peace, go, be the power in the human spirit. And you are certainly welcome to stay on, and we'll continue our conversation with Randi at this point. Okay, Randi.
Thank you, everyone.
Yes, if you want to go back to your screen share or.
Great.
Okay.
And that disappearing slide deck happened to me 3 times during together this morning. It's so interesting. All right, can you see that slide?
Yes.
All right, so now I feel a little bit less like I need to, so I just want to acknowledge what this is. So the different tiers of taking action that I'm sharing in this deck here range from literally the person in your life, and then we can look to how we can take action on a larger scale, all the way up to, looking at maybe opportunities in your area or across the country that you might want to volunteer or learn more about. So that's what this few minutes is about here. But the one piece I feel like we've laid a lot into these, like, depressing, to use that word literally, aspects of why this work is so important. So I really want to move us into a place of positivity. So what you want to do is you want to be 100% authentic and keep it real. So what does that mean? It means you're here, right, for a reason, and you want to develop and strengthen your knowledge about these identities and the experiences of LGBTQ young people. Recognize, right, don't downplay how important you are in your role in supporting people. It's okay to make mistakes, but correct them when someone says, "Hey, you got that wrong. My pronouns are this," or, "Oh, I actually don't feel that way as a queer person. I feel this way." So just really listen and do your best to use the language that young people in your life are using, or that anyone in your life is using. And so this activity is, I think, pretty key. And as I let you read through these for a moment, I'm going to let my cat, who is locked in the bedroom, out, and then we'll do the activity as a group. So one moment.
Okay. And I'm just going to read that. Someone asked if we're still recording, and Patty said we'll stop recording when we start the discussion.
Thank you, Jessie. I was just going to clarify that. Thanks.
All right. So not necessarily in this order, but these are components of what I learned are really useful in communicating with anyone, really, but in the training that I received, communicating with young people who were calling because they needed some support. And so I'll read them out quickly, and then we're going to look at one case scenario, and together we'll collaboratively, the goal would be to come up with how we could respond to this young person. So we want to use open-ended questions. So what does that mean? We don't want to use language or like put language in someone else's mouth. So open-ended questions might be something like, can you tell me more about that? Or what does that word mean to you? Or yeah, things like that. So rather than maybe you're responding by saying, "Oh, so you do this," or "Oh, you do that," right? Like we don't want to put our own understanding into someone else's words. We want to really know what they're meaning when they say what they say, and repeating it back what they said, right? So if someone tells you, "I am bisexual," and you've asked them, "Well, what does that mean to you?" and they say, it means that I'm attracted to men and women, then you want to repeat back and say, so it sounds like you're saying that you're attracted to people who are men and women, literally, just feeding it back. And you can say, did I get that right? And maybe they'll say, no, actually, right? Or yes, exactly. And that's how you're clarifying any miscommunication through that. You want to acknowledge their experiences and say, sounds like, you're dealing with a lot right now, and accepting and validating their feelings would be saying, wow, that must be really hard. And it sounds like you feel stressed out. Do I have that right? Are you pretty stressed out? Yeah, or no, I'm not stressed out so much as I am frustrated, right? And so that's, again, that's circle back. So it's not really in any order, but it's just recognizing the importance of really listening and making sure you're getting it right, what they're saying to you. Because the more that they hear that you're getting it right, what they're telling you, then they actually are forming this trust with you. They're forming a bond with you. They're forming, this person really is hearing me and they get what I'm saying. And that goes so far. I can't even tell you. I mean, the difference between life and death in some cases. If they know there's someone in their life who is going to do this for them, it makes all the difference. So we're going to look at one particular scenario here, and this comes from, I believe this came from the GLAD page, but I could be wrong. I can't see my notes, but it'll be in the resources. So I pulled this off of, this is not someone whose privacy I have totally blown into the world. This is on a website, and this person shared their experience. So this is Daniel. He's 13 years old. And since kindergarten, I've always felt accepted by my friends, but appreciation of my outward expression doesn't reach far past my small friend group. I get bullied for being too girly and hanging out with the girls. To avoid being teased, I deepen my voice around others. In PE, kids say that I play like a girl, or that I'm not good enough to play with the other boys because I'm too gay. It's like they think they're going to turn gay if they're near me. Even my father tells me to act more like a man. So I'm going to ask us to think about together, and you can do this either in the chat or by unmuting. One of the other things, well, you'll find on the slide prior to that was just like different signs of anxiety and depression that you can look for. And then other ways, right, beyond your direct contact with a young person. Well, actually, this is still part of that, but just being a role model, and you can do that through lots of different tools. As an educator, we can use so many different things like books or just how we talk and what we do, right? Kids really watch what we do and what we say and what we don't do and what we don't say. So even if a young person hasn't told you about anything with their identity, right? If we can kind of err on the side of like, there are things we don't know about young people's experiences that they might be having that are just inside their own head, their own world. And when young people who are LGBTQ, who are not out yet or still trying to kind of understand who they are, when they see you picking these books that reflect various different experiences, or they see you modeling what it's like to stand up for other people, they see you as an ally. And that's going to increase the likelihood that they're going to come to you when they need it. Versus if they see that you're choosing books that kind of tell the same story repeatedly. Same story meaning like, for example, only telling the story of young white boys on their journeys to manhood or something like that. Or, only representing people of a certain ability level, whatever it is. That's telling them something about you and what you stand for in your practices as well, and what you don't say when something happens that is uncomfortable. They see that too, and they see that as a sign that you are maybe not someone who they might go to get support, because you didn't really do anything when someone said something hurtful or did something that was inappropriate in their presence. And then you want to teach them how to avoid unsafe situations too. There are a lot of great bullying programs out there, or anti-bullying programs, I should say, those I don't really necessarily have included in here, but I'm happy to share more about that separately. But when we think about when is the right time, I guess I should say, to stand up for yourself or another person, because there are times when it may not be actually safe, physically safe or mentally, emotionally safe. And a lot of those programs will teach strategies to kids about, maybe just one little thing you can do is go get an adult, or maybe something you can do is help that person move away from the situation, or that maybe it's you and you just need to leave that situation. And so what might need to happen in those moments. And so when we look at the school level, there's lots of ways that we can take action. And I think about what you all are maybe looking to do, or some of you at SVES are looking to do, is to create a space. Because when I looked at the Pennsylvania area, not to like be negative, there's things are around the big cities, which makes sense. Like Pittsburgh and Philadelphia have programming for young people and have spaces. And a lot of them are doing virtual, which is great because it opens the bandwidth, as we know. We've experienced this year that like we can access, right? I'm talking to you right now for that same reason from Colorado. But that when we think about creating more spaces, especially when I think to my experience with Trevor, it was those small towns and places that were kind of more remote, where kids literally are more isolated and don't have as much connection and they need that. They need LGBTQ young people don't only exist in big cities, right? We're everywhere. And so I was able to find a fair amount of places where you can at least start. But I think what I'll direct you all as a group to is really thinking about looking at either the GLSEN page and welcoming schools, because those really give a lot of background into how to create spaces for young people who are LGBTQ. But maybe looking to some of these resources in Pennsylvania as models of what it looks like. All the ones that I chose here, for the most part, have or at least had when in person. Some of them have switched to virtual, which is great, but have like different types of support groups for young people that could be useful for you all to look at as models for what you might want to do. And I'd be happy to continue to partner with you for ideas or brainstorm if you'd like to get that up and going. So with that said, you'll see this and I'll send the slide deck. We'll have all the links in it, but this is basically all the information that I used for the presentation. And I'm sorry we didn't get to all the videos. Please do watch them. They are super informative. And thank you so much. I know we have a few minutes for Q&A. I'm happy to stay longer. And I hope I have not disrespected your time in any way.
Oh, Randi, thank you. Thank you so much. Yes, and we would love, our education committee would love to get together with you and explore more, our outreach in our very rural area that we live in. And I just, I'm thinking about, the religious communities, which SVES is ethical culture is considered a religion, but you hear so much. Well, we're tolerant. We have a tolerance for, or then you hear, well, we're very accepting, and then we affirm you. And I'm just wondering, as an ethical culture society, I mean, my thought is we want to be an affirming community versus a tolerant community,
right.
Or even accepting. I think those three terms all say something different. Mm-hmm. And I mean, how do you feel about, I guess more I don't know if I want to call it a marketing or an advertising or whatever,
right.
How should we approach this fact.
Yeah, no, and it's totally relates back the language piece, right? And at my school and many schools, we've been reviewing our mission statement, we've been reviewing our inclusivity statement to really, you know, get into that a bit and make sense of, you know, what does it mean if we say one versus the other? Well, it really is a world of difference. Teaching Tolerance, the organization who is one of the key spaces that educators can utilize for free resources around supporting equity, inclusion work, and social justice. Their name was Teaching Tolerance, like since creation, and they just now, a couple months back, went through the process of reviewing their name and have changed it to Learning for Justice. Yep, there's their magazine. So I think that's the last issue with that name.
Yes.
So again, they've changed from Teaching Tolerance to Learning for Justice, and they got a lot of flack over the years for their former title, and they stood up for saying, you know, what tolerance meant to them, right? It didn't mean to them just being tolerant in the sense that like they weren't going to actually affirm or do those other pieces. But lo and behold, they did kind of reflect on it, and clearly they decided to make the name a little bit more inclusive in terms of the language. So I think when I think of my school, for example, we think to ourselves, do we want to be a place where people feel just like, sure, I'm here, right? We're inclusive. I'm here, but still, right, when we think about that dominant culture, I don't feel treated the same. And so what word would reflect being actually treated actively as included? And we came to understand the word belonging is really important. So we can invite someone to dinner and they can sit at the table and we can not talk about their identities or ways in which they're feeling marginalized, and they're there and they were included, and then they can leave at the end of the night and we can go, oh, we're so great, we were being inclusive, right? We had our gay friends over, or we had our Black friends over, or we had our disabled friends over, or people with disability over to our home, but was that actually being welcoming and inclusive, and did they feel like they belonged at our table is a whole different question. So yeah, I'm all about that, thinking really deeply about the words, because it's all about how we behave and talk to each other that really shows whether or not we're being fully affirming and welcoming to people.
Yes, yes, great, great. Because in the month of June, we are going to be looking at our mission statement and the goals that we adopted back 2016. And so, yeah, I think these are things that, you know, terminology that, you know, we want to consider as we rewrite or revise these
sure.
things.
Yeah,
Yes.
and thinking about like, what does it look like in action is
Right.
really key in that process. Sorry, Jessie.
Chat update. Somebody said, we appreciate your unique humanity. And thanks for the insights, Randy. I hope you return for part 2.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Great. Great, Randy. Well, I think, you know, again, greatly appreciate the morning we had with you. And we do look forward to a part 2 and further discussion. So, and you're welcome to become part of our SVES family. So,
thank you so much.
Yes, yes. Okay, I think with that, we will close out the morning. I know folks, you know, have lots of things they want to get to here on Mother's Day. And so we will say goodbye.
I'm going to stop my share for you there.
There we go. And if everyone, a beautiful wave. And we'll see you next Sunday. And don't forget our food drive coming up this coming Saturday. Thank you all for attending.